Thank you for joining us in part one of this two-part series on preschool inclusion. The goal of this series is to inform the early childhood community on current federal and state policies and initiatives around inclusion, and to provide resources and examples on how to implement high-quality preschool inclusive programming. Did you know that national data in 1985 showed only 36.8% of preschoolers with disabilities spent 80% or more of their time in inclusive settings? Fast forward to 2012, and that number only increased by 5.7%. We can and should be doing better. What can we learn from this data? Well, the minimal increase here suggests it is really time for federal and state agencies to think about policy, practice, and an infrastructure that supports districts, communities, and early childhood professionals in implementing high-quality inclusive programming. Illinois is taking on this challenge and making inclusion a priority. There are a variety of initiatives and supports to assist programs in developing and implementing a plan for successful inclusion. Illinois StarNet is working in collaboration with Early Choices to meet their mission of increasing high-quality, inclusive education for each and every preschool child. While national and state data show there is much work to be done around inclusion in preschool settings, there are many programs across Illinois that are leading the way and implementing high-quality inclusive practices. We will hear from Emily Ropars, LRE Specialist, and Ann Kramer, Project Director of Early Choices, as well as talk with several early childhood professionals who are doing the right thing for all preschool children by providing high-quality inclusive programming and experiences day in and day out. We hope this video helps you think about how you can provide high-quality inclusive education for each and every child in your community.
So in 2009, NACCE, the National Association for the Education of Young Children, and DEC, which is the Division for Early Childhood of the Council for Exceptional Children, came together to make a joint position statement on inclusion. And it was significant because it was a general education early childhood professional organization and a professional organization that focuses on special education coming together to define what it is that we mean when we say inclusion. And so they defined it as children with disabilities and without disabilities having access to the same environments. And then they narrowed it down to 3 defining features of high quality inclusion, being access, participation, and supports.
To me, inclusion is every child having an equal opportunity to learn, to play, to develop, regardless of what their abilities are or where they're starting.
It's very basic. It's really meeting the needs of all the kids in the classroom, regardless what those needs are, and not segregating students based on what they need. So making sure services are there so that all students make progress.
Inclusion here means that we have all students with a variety of levels participating in one classroom together equally and wholly, and that there's differentiation happening among the teachers to make learning happen across all areas.
So access is all about children having access, and so it includes the environment, being able to access the environment, but also being able to access the learning and having their opportunities to participate in all of the learning activities.
So just having access isn't enough. Children need support to participate in that environment, and that includes all the teacher techniques that you would use to modify your instruction for students so that they're able to engage in the same activities as the children who do not have disabilities.
Yeah, and then the third piece is the supports. So, and that's, I think of that 2 ways. There's the physical supports, making sure that we have the tools the children need to learn, but then also the adults to support the children, and then also thinking about what the adults need in order to provide that support. So professional development and ongoing training. So Early Choices is the least restrictive environment initiative for the Illinois State Board of Education, and our mission is to increase access to inclusive programming for each and every preschooler in Illinois. In Illinois, we have the Illinois Early Childhood Stakeholder Consortium, and that is a group of leaders and providers from across the state that come together on a quarterly basis, and Early Choices facilitates that with ISBE, and our goal has been to look at what are those challenges around providing inclusive preschool in Illinois, and working to address those. So we've done many things, and we have an inclusion brochure that ISBE has published, but the consortium worked hard on that. We also have a model of looking at inclusion and what makes it work. And again, that consortium worked together to support us in that. And then Early Choices has used that as a frame for supporting our districts in moving forward. We've had IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, for since the 90s, serving children 3 to 5. But, and it's always called for the least restrictive environment. But in the most recent years, we have had some great research that says we haven't really moved on that charge of including children. And so we've had 2 major pieces come out lately that have really supported us to move forward in Illinois around inclusion, and that's the policy statement that came from the Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, so bringing together the oversight from education, but then also Head Start and child care coming together, and our federal government laying out a clear policy of what they're looking for when they talk about least restrictive environment and inclusion for our youngest children has been a great force to drive us forward.
And I think the great thing about that document is it addresses the common barriers to inclusion that many programs and individuals cite as a barrier to including children with disabilities, and it provides resources to kind of respond to those barriers. And it gives a really nice layout of the research base, the scientific base, and the legal foundations for inclusion.
It also includes some recommendations for our state leaders and then also for our local leaders. And so it gives us a nice roadmap as a state of what we need to do to move forward, but then also gives a nice roadmap for the districts to look at what they can be doing to support inclusive practices.
And then recently we also had the Dear Colleague letter, which was issued by the Office of Special Education Programs. And it too really references a lot of the legal foundations for inclusion that have been in place for a long time. And it has some really strong language in there for programs to really look at when they're planning for including children with disabilities. The one that we sort of reference a lot is it really points out that programs need to address any negative impacts moving a child out of their current placement would have on him or her if we were to take them out of a community setting and put them in a specialized setting. And it's really important that we have those conversations to really think about our placement decisions.
The other piece from the Dear Colleague letter is there's some guidance around how to use your IDEA dollars to support your preschoolers in community environments. So that's something that we haven't seen before and can also help us think about how we can best use our resources to create high quality inclusive programs. So in Illinois, from that federal policy statement, we were motivated to move forward with that and think about what we could do in Illinois. So using those state recommendations, the first item was bringing all the stakeholders together and looking at policies that support inclusive practices. So we were able to write a grant and get some extra funding to support Illinois' Early Childhood Inclusion Policy Summit, and we held that in February of 2017. And it was great because when we just as the federal government did, we brought together the leaders from across the different agencies in Illinois. So we brought DHS, our education, ISBE, and then many DCFS, and then many private foundations and providers, and brought them all together to talk about how we can support policy in Illinois to make sure we're improving that access, participation, and supports across Illinois.
And after the summit, three major themes surfaced that we needed to work on in Illinois, and one of them was workforce, that we need to work together both at the higher ed level for teacher preparation, and also while teachers are working, the professional learning opportunities to really meet that supports aspect of the key aspects of inclusion, that we need teachers to have the right preparation before they start service and then during service to support them in best practices.
Right, and then I think the other outcomes were around access, just making sure that we're doing everything in Illinois that our policies support increased access instead of decreasing access. And then that collaboration piece to make sure that all the stakeholders are collaborating, because we don't want to have different expectations. We want to work together to bring the best services we can to make that high quality inclusive preschool.
And I think what we saw mirrored that we can't have silos in education. We can't have that at a state level, we can't have it at a federal level, and we can't have it at a local level where we have different programs acting individually from each other. We need that cross-sector engagement. In Illinois, we have the Illinois Inclusion Guidelines. There are 21 guidelines included in it, and it leads the program through a process of self-assessment. And the items go from classroom level practices all the way through systems level practices that support high quality early childhood inclusion. So a program can use that to first inform their program about what are some of the characteristics of a high quality program, but then they can dig deeper and go through it as a self-assessment and see where they are in terms of classroom practices, how much collaboration they have with other stakeholders in their community, and what are their policies and procedures that support inclusion. So one of the main barriers to inclusion is attitudes and beliefs. They've found that over and over again. That's one of the biggest barriers to inclusion. And so one of the ways that you can counteract that is to spread awareness and build relationships with stakeholders. So it's really important to reach out to members of the community, members right within your own education program, to build that shared understanding of what inclusion is and awareness of the legal foundations and all the basis we have in research that it's the right thing to do.
Right, and some other barriers are just that lack of awareness. And we know that it's just an ongoing process to keep sharing and getting the word out that high quality inclusion leads to better results in the long run. So that's part of that consortium, and part of Early Choice's work is to continue to raise awareness and let folks know the benefits of inclusion.
Right, and so what we find as people develop this shared understanding is the realization that high quality inclusion is just high quality early childhood education. They're universally true for each other.
We also see that just making sure that folks have the support they need to implement inclusion, and so working with programs to look at the resources they have and allocate those in the best way possible to support all the learners.
For the students who do have special needs, I feel that with inclusion, we push them to greater limits, I think, because we don't have a room that's designed for them to just sit and do the bare minimum. We want them to start doing as much as they can as their typically developing peers. So it's always a check for us to make sure, am I doing everything I can to get this kid to his full potential or her full potential?
I think from a parent's perspective, when you're trying to teach your kids to be accepting and to not necessarily notice differences and to be empathetic, it also helps the typical kids, because now they are, presented with, or they're in a classroom with someone who may not be exactly like them. And so they are making friends with kids, and they are accepting, and they're interacting with, kids that aren't necessarily like them.
I had a little girl in my classroom who used a wheelchair, and it kind of opened the door to me because that was my first experience with a child with special needs. And it was amazing to me how quickly the children adjusted to the accommodations that we had for this child. And everyone was so respectful, and it just taught those kindergartners that it doesn't matter who you are, how you move, how you talk, whether you're verbal or not, you're still a child, you're still a friend, you're still a person, you want to play. And I think it helps children just become accepting of differences.
But it has been a struggle to build family trust. In the school in general, we're typically the first school experience families have. And if their children are struggling in any kind of way, we have to work extra hard to build that trust because they're worried about things like, will we kick their child out? How are we going to make sure their child is safe? How are we going to make sure that their child has friends? And how can we ensure it's going to be a positive program? And we only have those families for a couple years. So it's a short-lived partnership, and it's really about how comfortable and welcome can we make those families feel, and can we build that partnership so they really are working with us together to meet those same goals.
I come from a special ed background. I taught special education for years before I started teaching blended programs. So I was kind of hesitant at first about the kinds of kids that can be included in the classroom. I would think to myself, this one's got such significant needs. Are we going to be able to make it work with this student in the classroom? And through the years, that's not as big of a challenge as it once was for me. You can start to look and see, okay, we can do this, we can manage this, we have enough people here to do this. You have enough experience, you've got a good team around you, that we can make this work. And I haven't had a student yet where we've had to say, you know what, this just isn't working. They need this smaller environment. We've always figured out a way to make it work.
I think had we started with a preschool that was primarily self-contained, or just Jonah being with other individuals with special needs, I think it might have changed how we thought about his services for the rest of his schooling. But because he was in an inclusive environment, that's what we were used to. We saw the benefits, we saw the power of him pushing and stretching and being challenged and wanting to be like his peers. And we knew that that's what we wanted for him in kindergarten. And we had that opportunity. We also had a choice. Actually, about mid-year through kindergarten, the school district we were at had started a self-contained autism program. And we were given that choice. Do you want to keep him in an inclusive environment, or he would have needed to move buildings and gone to a self-contained autism program. And I think I became familiar with that program. I think they did great things. I think they were, it was very appropriate for a number of kids. But I am so grateful that because of his early childhood experiences and that preschool experience, we really resisted that change. And we had a teacher at the time that was fully on board with us and said, no, he needs to stay in the inclusive environment. He tunes into the peers around him. He is challenging himself, and by being in that environment, we don't want to take him out of that. So luckily, we were kind of all on board, but we were given that choice and even had a little bit of pressure. And I think the pressure was other educators thinking this is really what would be best for him. And I'm glad we resisted it.
I think that we were very apprehensive, about what this looked like as far as taking the big step and watching Blake go off to school, but when we were able to do that and sit with the teachers and our team, and then we were told that Blake could be part of an inclusive environment like he is now, we were just really excited. And we were excited mostly because we knew that Blake would get such a benefit from just being a part of a class of people, a class of peers, an opportunity for him to connect and, socially make friends, socially interact. Our goal and our hope with inclusion was that it would really benefit everybody, including Blake, which is our priority. We really didn't know what to expect. For Taylor and I, that opened up such a long list of emotions. And I just remember facing, that particular meeting and just wonder what we would hear, what we were hoping for, and if we could make that work together. And we have been so blessed to find a school district that listens to us, that supports us. We actually have full confidence in the partnership that we have. And we didn't know that before we walked in, but every time we meet with a meeting, I'm always reminded of that's what's happening here. And I just love it, because it wasn't something that I thought we were going to have, but I think because of the way that the school believes in inclusion, believes in programs like this that will benefit my son, it opens the door for us.
My son Ben had significant involvement in terms of he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. He was nonverbal. He had limited functional movements of his arms. My daughter had a speech delay, and then my other son Colin was typically developing, and so they were all kind of at these 3 different points and had different types of needs. And like I said, it was important for us to be able to keep them together because they were triplets. So being in inclusion or in a blended classroom was just invaluable, in particular for my son Ben, just because I think going into the process, I think as a mom, I knew kind of what he was challenged with, and I think, I hate to say this, but I assumed that he would just be put somewhere, with other kids like him. And I mean, he had opportunities that I don't know that I expected for him. And so, as a mom, you hope that, you want everything for your kids. And so the chance that they gave him and, the expectations that they put on him, he was learning like anybody else would learn. And
from the minute he joined this program last year, there was, I don't want to say an immediate difference, but there was a marked difference, month after month in his progress in his behavior and in his development from the points that were, challenges to him in school. We saw, it was amazing from the time he started in September to December, he wasn't the same kid. And knowing that going into a bigger environment like kindergarten that's all day and very emotional and very stressful for, a child with his, disabilities, I feel like this really set him up for success. He was in an environment that, again, tailored to his needs, but still allowed him to be a kid and allowed him to be, a crazy little boy, but was able to hone in on those challenges and really make sure that he was able to learn an environment that was comfortable for him. I think maybe in some programs that aren't inclusive, maybe especially the school that we were at prior to this, it was much more regimented and rigid, and we actually had to pull him out because it wasn't conducive to his learning style. So I think the inclusion piece is really important. It's really set him up for success, and he's doing fantastic in kindergarten.
Having all of my children go through a child development lab, a daycare center, he was part of that during most of his days when I was at work, when my husband was at work. And in that setting, he had all of those peer models that were typically developing children that he was surrounded with, and he was very curious about the other children. So sometimes even fixated on the other children. And the growth that we saw, including his teacher, therapists that we had that came in to work with not only him, but the staff and the other children, all of those things, I think, gave him models, maybe without explicitly knowing he was trying to be like the other kids. He was trying to be like the other kids. And I will always credit that early start to him making the incredible gains that he has always made year after year and continues to make as a young man because of that early start where he was challenged and pushed and had appropriate, typically developing peer models. I think the benefit to all of the other children and now teenagers that he is surrounded with is also something that's hard to measure. They learned about differences. They learned about the really unique behaviors that Jonah had, the unique ways that he had to communicate. We got his peers involved in interventions like video modeling interventions and things like that that got them really excited about being a part of helping Jonah grow. And so just year after year, we've seen that inclusive environment be such a huge part of his growth. He is a senior in high school now, and last year as a junior for junior prom, he was prom king. You know, sometimes it's kind of this funny thing like, oh, is that really important? It was really important. Makes me cry a little bit, and it actually made Jonah cry when they announced his name. That night at prom, he got very teary because he really realized what that meant. Like, my friends like me, and that was really important to him. And I just think that because they are his peers, and he sees them every day, and he's with them every day, and he is part of their lives as high schoolers, and they think he's a pretty cool kid. So.